Hey, what's up, everybody? Pastor Matt here. Hey, I've got a question for you today, and it is simply this. Are you sure that you're reformed? Are you sure about that? You say, of course I'm reformed, man. I use the ESV as my Bible translation. I listen to John Piper. I like Matt Chandler, and I used to like Driscoll before he kind of went off the rocker. And I like Francis Chan, and I read the Gospel Coalition, and I've got a beard, and I follow Calvin on Twitter, and I read some of the Puritans, at least some of their quotes on Facebook and some of the memes and stuff like that. Of course I'm reformed. Well, let's talk about that for just a few moments today. What does it mean to be reformed? Well, reformed from what? Going back to the era of the Reformation, of course, as the church was, quote, reformed from some of its medieval errors and heresies, the church divided into a couple of different main branches. Of course, the Roman Catholic tradition continued strong under the leadership of the Pope. There was the Anglican Church formed under Henry VIII. And then, of course, there was the Lutheran branch of the church, primarily German, following Martin Luther. And then there's this other branch called the Reformed branch, which would be led by people like Zwingli at first, and later Calvin, as it went over to Scotland and Presbyterianism, John Knox, and many others. And of course, the Westminster Confession of Faith being the primary and most excellent Reformed confession. And so maybe you do believe in the so-called doctrines of TULIP, the 5 points of Calvinism, otherwise known as the doctrines of grace. However, there's a little bit more to being reformed than just subscribing to predestination. So let's talk about that for just a few moments. First of all, one of the things I already mentioned is that Reformed people are confessional. They're confessional, meaning that we subscribe to more than just the 5 points of Calvinism, but we have an entire system of doctrine that is contained in the Reformation era confessions of the faith. Of course, the ecumenical creeds as well, but especially as it's refined in the confessions of faith. The most excellent, of course, has already been named the Westminster Confession of Faith. When I say excellent, of course, a little bit of a dog in the fight there on Presbyterians, of course, I'm going to say that. But the Reformation era also had many other wonderful confessions as well. Among them, the Belgic Confession, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Synods of Dort. If you are truly reformed, and I don't mean to use the phrase TR, because what is a truly reformed guy? It's somebody who's more reformed than you, right? But in all seriousness, the sine qua non of being a reformed Christian is that we are at least confessional, and that means that we personally, as well as our church, and probably our presbyteries as well, even our denominations, subscribe to a particular set of doctrinal statements in one of the historic Reformed confessions. So it would be very hard to describe yourself as Reformed if you weren't a subscriber to one of the great Reformed confessions, and if your church that you participate in and hold your membership in also would obviously subscribe to said confession of faith. So there's that. Secondly, to be reformed is to be covenantal. To be covenantal. That means that we see the whole of redemptive history primarily under the covenants, the covenant of works and the covenant of grace. Now, another system kind of came up along the way called dispensationalism, and that is in many ways a rival to covenantal theology. But covenantalism works its way down into almost every facet of the church, including our view of the sacraments, the Lord's Supper and baptism. So, if you haven't brought your children forward for baptism, then you might not be as reformed as you think you are. You may love Charles Spurgeon, yes, and Charles Spurgeon, another one of those reformed guys with a lowercase r, a Calvinist in terms of soteriology, but not reformed in terms of his covenantal view of the sacraments. Covenantalism is primarily a top-down understanding of the promises of God. So we see baptism not so much as us devoting our lives upwardly, making promises of faithfulness to God, but primarily in terms of God's downward promises to us in Jesus Christ. Much like circumcision was the marker of God's covenant people in the Old Testament, so also baptism, that sign and seal of grace in the New. Okay, so Reformed people are covenantal. Finally, this, church order. If you're Reformed, but you're not a member of a church, or if your church is not a member of a group of churches, call it a presbytery, call it a synod, call it a general assembly. If your church is just out there kind of doing your own thing, or you're out there doing your own thing, it would be hard to classify yourself as being Reformed by any sort of strict definitional sense, because Reformed churches have yoked ourselves in communities that we call presbytery, synods, general assemblies, etc. And so we resist, in fact, we're kind of a counter movement to the individualism and the autonomous nature of congregationalism. And yes, that would include a lot of Baptist churches. Now, obviously, my point today is not to denigrate you if you are a Baptist. There is a movement called the Reformed Baptists, of course, and in some ways they are more or less Reformed. However, it's almost kind of been like a house that has like an addition built onto the side. Strictly speaking, those 3 C's of confessionalism, church order, and covenantal theology aren't always all there in the Reformed Baptist movement. So that's not a denigration of anybody's church or theology, just a simple statement of what it means to be Reformed in the most definitional and historically reflective sense. Okay, so maybe you're not as Reformed as you think you are. And that's okay, still love you. Just wanted to throw that out there for your consideration. So, you've got the doctrines of grace, you believe in TULIP, but what about the other 3 C's? Confessionalism, covenantal theology, and church order. Do you have that? I hope so. Either way, love you lots. Thanks for checking in, and we'll talk to you later.